Friends, when we hear today's gospel reading, we might well find ourselves thinking, how in the world can Jesus endorse dishonesty? How can he urge us to follow the ways of a crook, basically? Well, to understand why, we have to understand something about parables. This is what is called a parable. And a parable has just one focus and doesn't care too much about the details of the rest of the story. The focus point in today's gospel is that the dishonest steward used every effort to prepare for his future. And Jesus urges his followers, do the same. Just like the steward used his abilities and his cleverness and his possessions to make sure that he would be okay after he got fired from his job, so Jesus urges us to use our abilities, our possessions, our cleverness to prepare for our meeting with God. Jesus calls our possessions dishonest wealth. And we might bristle at that. We might say, well, wait a minute now. What does he mean, dishonest wealth? I came by my wealth, whatever it is, through hard work. And I came to it honestly. Well, that's true, probably, of many of us, most of us. That's true. A lot of the possessions we have, and whatever wealth we have, probably came from a lot of hard work. But at the same time, I think we have to admit that the wealth of our nation and the wealth of much of the world is tainted. Much human wealth has been gained by strong nations exploiting the poor nations of the world by taking their natural resources without an honest recompense for what we're taking. Much wealth, of course, has been created by criminal or immoral behavior, dealing illicit drugs, prostitution, pornography, which, as you're probably aware, is more wealthy than almost anything in the world today. The pornography industry is just far and above almost anything. By fostering addictions, many times, to drugs, alcohol, gambling, so forth. Much wealth has been made by taking advantage of people's health problems. Some of you know that very well. How medication and therapeutic drugs often cost far, far more than it takes to manufacture them. There was a guy, you may remember that one guy who came up with some drug that was going to help all kinds of people, and he charged something like 1,000% more than it cost him to make it. Much wealth, of course, has been gained through the abortion industry. And millions of our unborn children have been sacrificed to the desire for sexual pleasure without the willingness to responsibly accept the consequences of our behavior. Much wealth now has been gained by being able to purchase cheaply goods that are made in some of the foreign countries where the people who produce the goods are doing it at almost slave wages. And yet, we will say, well, it's cheaper to buy that than it is to go to the local guy. Now, nevertheless, with all of that, Jesus does tell us that we can use our possessions even though they are tainted. We can use our possessions to build up his kingdom. Now, we know that many people in our country and many people in the world, and many of you sitting there before me, have used sometimes your possessions, sometimes your money, and so forth. And you've used it in terms of crisis or for people who are in need. So we know that does happen. It's not all dark and gloom about everything. What our Lord wants of us, in a sense, is to see every day as a day of crisis. I don't know about you, but I counted them when I went to the post office the other day. 25 letters. The parish got one envelope. Yours truly got 25 different appeals for help. Religious orders, politicians running for office, Doctors Without Borders, every day. And what's funny is I sometimes wonder, you wonder if people use common sense. So I get one, from the same outfit, I get one envelope that says Thomas Dzielak, another envelope that says Monsignor Thomas Dzielak, another one that says Reverend Thomas Dzielak, all in the same mail. You get that at home? Well, you probably don't. You don't have these weird titles. But we get that stuff. And so we know what Jesus is saying. Every day everybody's in crisis. And it's always an emergency appeal. Emergency appeal. So we could never say, well, now we're done. Now, we can't solve all the problems of the world. And so we cannot simply give to every group that wants something. Let's face it, we can't. We have some interesting sayings about wealth and money, don't we? The detectives and police officers on mystery movies or TV shows, what do they say? Follow the money to solve the crime. Or, I heard an actor on the TV show the other day say, it's always about the money. Billy Graham, the famous evangelist, said one time, a man's heart is closer to his wallet than almost anything else. Now, Jesus says the same thing. He says, the use you make of your money and your possessions tells God whether you serve him or serve mammon. Now, mammon is a fancy word for wealth in the Bible. Mammon was the god of wealth. It comes from one of the Jewish mythology things. As we examine our use of our possessions and our use of our wealth, whatever that may be, we can see whether we serve God or serve mammon. If our use of our possessions and money says, yes, I serve God, then let's persevere in it. If, when I take a look at my wealth and my possessions, I have to honestly say, I think I serve mammon more than God, then it's time for a conversion to the Lord.